Get him out, before I have him removed in handcuffs." The words cut through the courtroom like a blade through flesh. 83 people, lawyers, defendants, family members, court staff, all turned toward the same spot. Toward the black security guard standing at the back door. Toward Darnell Sutton. The judge's finger pointed straight at him, not a gesture, an accusation. 17 years later, that same finger would tremble as it signed a resignation letter. But neither man knew that yet. "Your Honor," the deputy clerk's voice faltered. "Did I stutter, Phyllis?" Judge Raymond Stanton's robes rustled as he leaned forward on the bench. 61 years old. 26 years on this bench. A man who had never been told no by anyone wearing less than a law degree. "I asked who authorized that person to stand in my courtroom." Darnell didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't reach for the radio on his belt or the assignment sheet folded in his breast pocket. He'd been trained by the United States Army to stand still when explosions went off around him. A judge's temper was nothing compared to an IED in Fallujah. But his hand did move, slowly, invisibly, to the small notebook in his back pocket. His thumb found the corner of the page. Ready. Security assignment sheet, dated today. Phyllis Drummond's voice came out barely above a whisper. She held up a clipboard like a shield. Courtroom 4, D. Sutton, 0800 to 1600, authorized by Shift Supervisor R. Kendrick. Stanton's eyes never left Darnell's face. The judge's lip curled. Not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. Something in between. Something that said he'd already decided how this would end. "I don't care what the sheet says." Each word landed like a gavel strike. "I care what I see, and what I see is someone who does not belong in my courtroom." If you're already hooked and want to see what happens when this judge discovers who he's really dealing with, hit that subscribe button now, because the twist in this story will leave you speechless. The courtroom held its breath. In the gallery, a young public defender lowered her files. At the prosecution table, an assistant DA pretended to study his notes. The bailiff, Desmond Meacham, 15 years in Stanton's courtroom, stood frozen near the jury box, his hand hovering over his radio but not touching it. No one intervened. No one ever did. Darnell had heard about Judge Stanton before his transfer to Courtroom 4. Everyone in the courthouse had. The man ran his domain like a feudal lord, complete with loyalty tests and public executions. Career executions, anyway. 3 security officers had been reassigned from his courtroom in the past 18 months. All black, all within weeks of their assignment. But hearing about it and standing in it were different things entirely. "Your Honor?" Darnell's voice came out level, calm. The voice he'd used to talk down panicked civilians in a war zone. "I was assigned to this courtroom through standard rotation. If there's an issue with my performance, I'd appreciate knowing specifically what..." "Issue?" Stanton's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "The issue is that I asked for competent security, and instead I got..." He waved his hand at Darnell like he was swatting a fly. "This." The word hung in the air. This. Not him, not Officer Sutton, not even a name. This. Like Darnell was a stain on the carpet. A mistake someone else had made that Stanton was forced to look at. In the back of his mind, behind the discipline and the training, and the years of learning how to survive in spaces where his presence was tolerated but never welcomed, something clicked into place. A recording device that would run for 17 years. A file that would grow page by page, incident by incident, until it became heavy enough to bring down a judge. But that was later. Right now, Darnell did what his father had taught him to do when powerful men tried to make you disappear. He stayed. "I understand, Your Honor." His voice didn't waver. "I'll wait outside for further instructions." He turned and walked toward the door. Not hurried, not defeated. Just a man doing his job, following orders, giving the judge exactly what he wanted, compliance. But as his hand touched the door handle, he heard Stanton's voice one more time. Quiet this time, almost conversational. Meant for the courtroom staff, not for Darnell's ears. "Make sure he doesn't come back. Ever." Darnell pushed through the door and let it close behind him. Then he pulled out his notebook. 3 weeks earlier, Darnell Sutton had walked into the Judicial Security Division locker room at 6:45 a.m., the same way he'd walked into every assignment for the past 3 years, early, prepared, and expecting nothing good. The locker room smelled like industrial cleaner and old sweat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of gray that government buildings seemed to manufacture. Rows of metal lockers lined the walls, most of them dented, all of them ugly. Darnell found his assigned locker, number 247, and began his routine. Uniform inspection first. He laid out his security officer shirt on the bench, checking for wrinkles, loose threads, stains. Found one small crease near the left pocket, unacceptable. He pulled out the travel iron he kept in his bag and set it heating on the small counter near the sink. Next, shoes. He'd polished them the night before, but he checked them again under the harsh light. The toe caps gleamed like mirrors. He could see his own reflection in them, a 32-year-old black man with close-cropped hair, tired eyes that had seen 2 tours in Iraq, and the kind of posture that came from years of being told to stand up straight by drill sergeants who meant it. Finally, he opened the small leather pouch that held his most important equipment. Not his radio, not his flashlight, not even the expandable baton he hoped he'd never have to use. A notebook, 4 inches by 6 inches, black cover, spiral-bound, 80 pages of college-ruled paper, 43 of which were already filled with his small, precise handwriting. His father had given him his first notebook when Darnell was 12 years old, the day after a white teacher had accused Darnell of cheating on a test he'd actually aced. "Write it down," his father had said. "Everything. Names, dates, times, what they said, who saw it. Write it down because they'll lie. They'll always lie, and when they do, you'll have the truth in your pocket." His father had kept notebooks for 40 years, documenting every indignity, every slight, every moment when the world reminded him that his black skin made him suspicious in spaces he had every right to occupy. He'd filled 27 of them by the time he died of a heart attack at 63, a heart that had been worn down, Darnell believed, by the constant weight of having to prove his own innocence in his own country. Darnell was on his 14th notebook now. He hoped this one would stay mostly empty. The locker room door banged open, and Royce Kendrick walked in. 50 years old, 18 years with judicial security, shift supervisor for the past 4, a position he'd gotten not through competence, but through the simple mathematics of outlasting everyone else. He had the soft body of a man who spent more time behind a desk than on his feet, and the hard eyes of someone who'd learned that cruelty was easier than kindness in institutions that rewarded neither. Kendrick stopped when he saw Darnell. "Sutton." The name came out flat. "You're the new courtroom 4 assignment." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Darnell continued arranging his locker, uniforms on the left, folded by regulation, gear on the right, notebook in the small shelf at the top. "Transfer came through yesterday." Kendrick watched him for a moment. Then he walked closer, his boots heavy on the concrete floor, and stood just inside Darnell's peripheral vision. Close enough to be felt, not close enough to be challenged. "Let me give you some advice," Kendrick said, free of charge. Darnell didn't turn around. "I'm listening." "Judge Stanton is particular about his courtroom, about who works in it, about how things are done." Kendrick's voice dropped into something that might have been genuine concern but felt more like a threat wrapped in helpful packaging. "He's been on that bench since before you were born. He has friends, important friends, connections that go all the way up to the state Supreme Court." Darnell placed his spare radio battery on the shelf, aligned it with the edge. "I understand." "Do you?" Kendrick stepped closer. Now Darnell could smell him, coffee and stale cigarettes and something sour underneath. Because the last 3 officers assigned to courtroom 4 didn't understand, and now they're working the night shift at the parking garage, when they're working at all. 3 officers, all reassigned within weeks. Darnell had heard the rumors. Now he was hearing the confirmation. "I appreciate the heads up." He turned to face Kendrick, keeping his posture open, his expression neutral. "Is there anything specific I should know about Judge Stanton's preferences?" Kendrick's eyes narrowed. He'd expected fear, or anger, or at least the kind of nervous deference that made power feel powerful. What he got instead was the flat calm of a man who'd had rifles pointed at his chest and learned that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Just keep your head down," Kendrick said finally. "Do your job. Don't make waves, and for God's sake." He looked Darnell up and down, his lip curling slightly. "Try not to stand out." He turned and walked away, leaving Darnell alone in the locker room with the buzz of fluorescent lights and the weight of words unspoken. Don't stand out. In a courtroom where his presence was already a provocation, his silence already a threat, his competence already an insult to men who'd decided long ago that people who looked like him didn't belong in spaces they controlled. Darnell finished organizing his locker with military precision, uniforms exactly 2 inches apart, shoes aligned at 45-degree angles, notebook in the top shelf, spine facing out, ready to grab at a moment's notice. Then he closed the locker, checked his reflection one more time in the small mirror mounted on the inside of the door, and walked out to start his first day in courtroom 4. He lasted exactly 11 minutes before someone reminded him he wasn't welcome. The reminder came from Phyllis Drummond. She was waiting in the hallway outside courtroom 4 when Darnell arrived at 7:53 a.m., a full 7 minutes before his shift was scheduled to begin. 58 years old, graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, glasses perched on the end of her nose like a weapon she wasn't afraid to use. Deputy clerk for Judge Stanton for the past 19 years. The gatekeeper, the enforcer, the woman who decided who got access and who got frozen out. She looked at Darnell the way a homeowner looks at a stain that won't come out of the carpet. "You're the new security assignment." Again, not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Officer Sutton." "I know who you are." She glanced down at a clipboard she was holding, though Darnell suspected she'd already memorized whatever was written there. "You served in the military. Army Military Police. 2 tours. And before your transfer here, you were assigned to the main entrance. For 2 years, yes." Phyllis looked up from her clipboard. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and just as warm. "Let me be clear about something, Officer Sutton. Judge Stanton runs his courtroom with a certain standard. He's very particular about who works in his presence, about professionalism, about discipline." Darnell waited. He'd learned a long time ago that people like Phyllis Drummond never stopped talking until they'd said what they really meant. "The officers who were assigned here before you—" She paused, choosing her words with the care of someone who knew they might be repeated later. "They had difficulties meeting those standards. I'm sure you'll do better." Difficulties. Such a clean word for what Darnell suspected had been a systematic campaign of harassment. "I'll do my best, ma'am." "See that you do." She turned toward the courtroom doors, then paused, looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Officer Sutton? Judge Stanton prefers that security personnel maintain a low profile, unobtrusive. The back door is your assigned position. You're not to enter the main courtroom unless explicitly called for." The back door. Away from the bench. Away from the jury box. Away from anywhere he might be seen by anyone who mattered. Invisible. "Understood," Darnell said. Phyllis nodded once, the kind of nod that wasn't approval, just acknowledgement that he'd received his orders, and disappeared through the courtroom doors. Darnell stood alone in the hallway. The back door, his assigned position. He walked to it, took his post, and began counting the minutes until he'd been there long enough to pull out his notebook without being seen. It took 47 minutes before another courthouse employee spoke to him. This time it was Desmond Meacham, the bailiff. He emerged from a side door, a styrofoam cup of coffee in his hand, and almost walked past Darnell entirely before stopping. "New guy, right?" "Officer Sutton." Meacham looked him up and down. 43 years old, according to the roster Darnell had studied before his transfer. 15 years as Stanton's bailiff. The kind of man who'd learned to survive in a toxic environment by becoming part of the toxin. Word of advice, Meacham said, echoing Kendrick's earlier warning with the same false concern. When Judge Stanton gives an order, you follow it. No questions. No hesitation. He says jump, you ask how high. He says disappear, you vanish. Got it? Got it. Good. Meacham took a sip of his coffee, watching Darnell over the rim. Because the last guy who tried to stand his ground in there? Let's just say he learned that job security means nothing when a judge decides he doesn't want to see your face anymore. He walked away, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. Darnell waited until Meacham was gone. Then he pulled out his notebook and wrote, Day 1, 0841 hours. Courtroom 4 hallway. Bailiff D. Meacham warned me to follow orders without question or face learning that job security is meaningless when a judge decides he doesn't want to see your face anymore. Witness. None. Pattern consistent with warnings from R. Kendrick and P. Drummond. Documented. He closed the notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. 11 days later, Judge Stanton would see his face for the first time, and everything would change. The first 11 days were a masterclass in institutional invisibility. Darnell stood at his post for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and in that time, he witnessed exactly 3 types of treatment directed at employees in Judge Stanton's domain. Type 1. The favorites. A small circle of white staff members, the court reporter, 2 of the clerks, the senior bailiff, who received smiles, nods, the occasional joke from the bench. They were allowed to enter through the main doors. Their names were used. Their presence was acknowledged as human. Type 2. The tolerated. A larger circle of staff who existed in a kind of professional limbo, not welcomed, but not targeted. They did their jobs, kept their heads down, and received neither warmth nor hostility. Most of them were white. A few were not. None of them were black. Type 3. The marked. Everyone else. Darnell watched a black janitor get reprimanded for leaving a streak on a window that was spotless when he inspected it later. He watched a black filing clerk get sent back to the basement archives because her paperwork was disorganized. He'd seen the folders, and they were alphabetically perfect. He watched a black court reporter get rotated out of courtroom 4 after 2 days because she didn't meet Judge Stanton's standards for accuracy. Her accuracy rating was 98.4%, according to the certification on the wall of the break room. 3 incidents, 3 black employees, 3 removals or reprimands in 11 days. Darnell documented all of it. Day 3, 1423 hours, main courtroom floor. Janitor T. Williams, black, male, approximately 45, reprimanded by P. Drummond for streak on window near jury box. Williams cleaned window in my presence at 14:15. No streak visible at 14:17 when I passed same window. Reprimand documented in Williams' personnel file per Drummond's statement to C. Pratt. Witnesses, none direct. Court reporter M. Henderson present but occupied. Day 7, 0934 hours, courtroom 4 entrance. Filing clerk A. Robinson, black, female, approximately 30, returned to archives by C. Pratt for disorganized paperwork. I observed same folders at 0912 during routine security check. Files were in alphabetical order by defendant last name, then chronological by filing date. No organization issues visible. Witnesses, security camera at East Hallway may have footage. Day 9, 1645 hours. Court Administrator's Office, Court Reporter D. Foster, black female, approximately 35, informed of rotation out of Courtroom 4 by C. Pratt. Reason given: accuracy concerns. Foster's state certification, posted in break room, shows 98.4% accuracy rating, highest in department per certification comparison. Witnesses: receptionist L. Thornton present during conversation. By the 11th day, Darnell had filled 9 pages with similar entries. By the 11th day, He understood exactly what kind of courtroom he'd been assigned to, and by the 11th day, Judge Stanton finally noticed him. It happened at 8:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. The courtroom was packed for a high-profile hearing, something about a corporate fraud case that had made the local news. Media in the gallery, extra security at the main entrance. Every seat filled with lawyers, reporters, and spectators who wanted to see justice, or at least drama, in action. Darnell was at his usual post by the back door, invisible, unobtrusive, exactly where he'd been ordered to be. But the crowd was large, and a family member of one of the defendants, an elderly woman with a walker, needed to use the restroom. The main entrance was blocked by the media scrum. The side doors were locked from the inside. The back door was the only option. "Excuse me, officer." The woman's voice was thin, trembling. "I need to get through. It's urgent." Darnell assessed the situation in seconds. The woman was clearly in distress. The main courtroom was in recess for the next 5 minutes. His post allowed him to open the back door for emergency exits. This qualified. "Yes, ma'am. Right this way." He opened the door and guided her through, one hand hovering near her elbow to steady her if needed. The whole process took less than 90 seconds. He was back at his post before the recess ended. But when the recess ended, Judge Stanton saw him. The judge had emerged from his chambers early, likely to avoid the crowd that would flood in when proceedings resumed. He'd taken his seat on the bench before anyone else entered. A power move, Darnell realized, designed to establish that the courtroom existed on his timeline, not anyone else's. And from that elevated position, he'd had a clear view of the back door, of Darnell opening it, of Darnell stepping through it, of Darnell, for the first time, being visible in his courtroom. The judge's face went through several expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, recognition of something that didn't belong, then cold, rigid fury. "Phyllis." His voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who'd learned that whispered threats landed harder than screams. "Who authorized security personnel to enter my courtroom without my explicit permission?" Phyllis Drummond appeared at his side like she'd been summoned from thin air. "Your Honor?" "That man," Stanton pointed directly at Darnell, "at the back door. I didn't authorize any security presence in this courtroom today. I specifically requested that we use the standard bailiff arrangement for this hearing." "Your Honor, Officer Sutton is assigned to courtroom 4 through the regular security rotation. He's been posted at the back door for the past 11 days. 11 days? Stanton's voice rose. Not quite a shout, but close. "You're telling me that man has been in my courtroom for 11 days without my knowledge?" The gallery was filling now. Lawyers and reporters taking their seats, curious glances directed at the back of the room where Darnell stood, still and silent, his hand already moving toward the notebook in his pocket. "Your Honor, the backdoor assignment is standard procedure for high-capacity hearings." "I don't care about procedure." Stanton's gavel came down once, hard, though proceedings hadn't officially resumed. "I care about who enters my courtroom. I care about maintaining the dignity of these proceedings. And I care—" his voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again, "about being informed when someone new is assigned to my domain." His domain. Not the courtroom, not the judicial system, not the state. His domain. "Get him out." The words came out flat, final. "Before I have him removed in handcuffs." And there it was. The sentence that would echo for 17 years. The sentence that Darnell would write in his notebook, then type in legal briefs, then read aloud in testimony, then quote in a governor's signing statement. "Get him out, before I have him removed in handcuffs." For opening a door to help an elderly woman use the restroom, for being visible, for being present, for being black in a space where a white man had decided such presence was a crime. This story is just getting started, and you're going to want to see how it ends. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss the moment everything flips. Darnell stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4 for exactly 16 minutes before anyone acknowledged his existence. The door remained closed. The hearing continued inside. Life went on as if the scene at the back door had never happened. which, in institutional terms, meant it had happened exactly as intended. A disturbance had been identified. The disturbance had been removed. Order had been restored. The fact that the disturbance was a human being with a name, a service record, and constitutional rights was irrelevant to the men who ran this building. At 8:58 a.m., the door opened and Calvin Pratt stepped out. Court administrator, 44 years old, MBA from a mid-tier state school, law degree from a worse one. The kind of man who'd learned early that survival in bureaucracies meant pleasing the powerful and sacrificing the expendable. His suit cost more than Darnell's monthly rent, and his handshake, when he offered it to the right people, was practiced enough to feel almost genuine. He didn't offer his hand to Darnell. "Officer Sutton?" Pratt's voice was smooth, professional, completely empty of anything resembling human warmth. "Judge Stanton has requested your immediate removal from courtroom 4 duty." "On what grounds?" The question seemed to catch Pratt off guard. He'd expected compliance, not inquiry. "Operational grounds. The judge feels that your presence is—" He paused, selecting his words with care. "Disruptive to the proceedings. I was at my assigned post. I opened a door to assist an elderly woman who needed restroom access. The entire incident took less than 2 minutes." "I understand." Pratt's smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "But the judge has expressed his preference, and court administration respects judicial preferences regarding courtroom security arrangements." Judicial preferences. Such a clean phrase for what was happening. "I'd like to file a formal objection to this reassignment." Darnell kept his voice level. "I'd also like a written statement explaining the specific performance deficiency that led to this decision." Pratt's smile flickered. "I don't think that's necessary. Employee Handbook, Section 7.2. Darnell had memorized the relevant sections his first week on the job. Any reassignment resulting from judicial request must be accompanied by written documentation of the specific conduct or performance issue that prompted the request. The affected employee has the right to respond in writing within 5 business days. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Pratt hadn't expected this. He'd expected what he always got: quiet compliance from employees who knew that fighting back only made things worse. He'd expected Darnell to take his reassignment and disappear into the lower levels of the courthouse bureaucracy, another black face shuffled out of sight because someone with power found his presence inconvenient. He hadn't expected someone who knew the rules. "I'll have to look into that." Pratt's voice had lost some of its smoothness. "In the meantime, please report to the main security desk for reassignment. I'll be happy to do that as soon as I receive the written documentation required by Section 7.2. Their eyes met. Pratt's were calculating, reassessing, trying to figure out what kind of threat this security guard might actually represent. Darnell's were calm, steady, revealing nothing except the same patience that had kept him alive in Fallujah. "I'll have something to your inbox by end of day," Pratt said finally. "I appreciate that." Darnell pulled out his notebook, made a brief entry, and slid it back into his pocket. "I'll wait at the main security desk for further instructions." He turned and walked away, leaving Pratt standing alone in the hallway with the uncomfortable realization that this particular reassignment might not go as smoothly as he'd planned. The email arrived at 4:32 p.m. Darnell was sitting at a desk in the main security office, where he'd been assigned to administrative duties that consisted of nothing more than watching a camera monitor that showed an empty parking garage. Make work, the kind of assignment designed to bore someone into quitting. His phone buzzed. New email. From calvin.pratt@statecourts.gov to darnell.sutton@statecourts.gov. Subject: Reassignment. Notification Officer. Sutton, effective immediately, you are reassigned from courtroom 4 to general rotation. This decision is based on operational needs and the court's responsibility to maintain an environment conducive to judicial proceedings. This reassignment does not reflect negatively on your performance and should not be construed as a disciplinary action. Please report to the main security desk tomorrow at 0800 for your new assignment. Calvin Pratt. Court Administrator Darnell read the email twice, Then he read it a third time, focusing on what wasn't there. No specific incident cited. No performance deficiency identified. No mention of the elderly woman, the back door, the 90 seconds that had somehow justified his removal from an assignment he'd held for 11 days. Operational needs. Environment conducive to judicial proceedings. Words designed to mean everything and nothing. Words that could justify any action while defending against any challenge. Words that had probably been approved by the courthouse legal counsel before they ever reached Pratt's keyboard. Darnell forwarded the email to his personal account. Then he opened his notebook and wrote, "Reassignment email received 16:32 hours. No specific performance issue cited despite handbook requirement. Email references operational needs and environment conducive to judicial proceedings, neither of which address the actual incident or provide actionable feedback. Pattern note. This language is consistent with previous reassignment notices I've reviewed in FOIA requests from other departments. Suggests pre-approved template for removals that avoid documentation of discriminatory basis. Next steps. File formal response within 5-day window per Section 7.2. Request all emails between C. Pratt, R. Kendrick, and Judge Stanton from today's date. Document witness statements from anyone who observed the incident. Documented." He closed the notebook. Then he pulled out his phone and called the one person he knew he could trust. His mother answered on the third ring. "Darnell?" Her voice carried the particular mix of warmth and worry that all mothers develop when their children live far away. "Is everything all right?" "I need advice, Mama." A pause. The sound of a chair scraping against a floor, of her settling in for a real conversation. Darnell imagined her in the small kitchen of the house in Mobile where he'd grown up, the same kitchen where his father had sat every evening writing in his own notebooks. "Tell me." He told her. The assignment, the warnings, the 11 days of watching other black employees get pushed out for invisible infractions. The elderly woman, the back door, the 90 seconds that had ended with a judge threatening to have him arrested. The email that said nothing and meant everything. When he finished, the line was silent for a long moment. "What did your father always say?" Her voice was quieter now. "Outlast them." "And what else?" Darnell closed his eyes. "Write it down. Everything. Names, dates, times, what they said, who saw it. Write it down, because they'll lie. They'll always lie. And when they do, you'll have the truth in your pocket. Are you writing it down?" "Every word." "Then you're not alone." He could hear the steel in her voice now, the same steel that had raised 3 children in a country that saw their existence as a problem to be solved. "You have witnesses in those pages. You have evidence. You have truth. And truth is heavier than power, baby. It just takes longer to land. What if they fire me before it lands? Then you'll have documentation of wrongful termination and a civil rights attorney who'll be happy to take that case on contingency." His mother's laugh was short, sharp, familiar. "You think you're the first black man to get pushed out by someone who didn't want to see your face? Baby, that's not a new story. That's American history. But you know what else is American history? The ones who fought back, the ones who kept records, the ones who outlasted them." Darnell felt something loosen in his chest. Not hope, exactly. More like recognition. He'd known all of this already, had been raised knowing it, had lived it every day of his 32 years. But hearing it from his mother's voice, in the same kitchen where his father had filled 27 notebooks before his heart finally gave out, it felt like permission. Permission to fight. "Thanks, Mama." "Don't thank me. Win." She paused. "And call your sister. She's been asking about you." "I will." "And Darnell?" "Yeah?" "Your father would be proud of you. Whatever happens, he'd be proud." The line went dead. Darnell sat in the empty security office, the camera monitor showing the same empty parking garage it had shown for the past 4 hours. Then he opened his notebook to a fresh page and began planning his next move. The next 3 weeks were a careful choreography of compliance and documentation. Darnell reported to his new assignments without complaint. General rotation, which meant he was shuffled from the main entrance to the parking garage to the basement archives, never staying in one place long enough to establish relationships, never being trusted with anything more complicated than checking bags and opening doors. But he watched, and he documented. The janitor who'd been reprimanded for the non-existent streak. Darnell found him on a smoke break and asked, casually, if he'd ever experienced anything similar before. Thomas Williams laughed, the bitter laugh of a man who'd stopped being surprised a long time ago. "Brother, I've been cleaning this building for 9 years. Every single time I get assigned to the 4th floor, something happens. Streaks on windows, scuff marks on floors, fingerprints on door handles that I never touched. It's like clockwork, every single time." Darnell wrote it down. The filing clerk who'd been sent to the basement, Darnell caught her in the break room, pretending to read a newspaper while she stared at the wall. "They said my files were disorganized," she said. Her name was Angela Robinson, and she'd been with the courthouse for 6 years. "I've never had a single complaint about my work. 6 years, perfect evaluations. Then I get assigned to courtroom 4 for 2 weeks, and suddenly I don't know how to alphabetize?" Darnell wrote it down. The court reporter who'd been rotated out, he tracked her down at the county's secondary courthouse, where she'd been reassigned to handle overflow cases. "My accuracy rating is 98.4%, Danielle Foster said. "Highest in the department, and Judge Stanton personally requested my removal because I wasn't meeting his standards for accuracy. When I asked what specific errors I'd made, no one could point to a single one, not one." Darnell wrote it down. 3 employees, 3 black employees, 3 removals or reprimands that had no documented basis in actual performance issues, and all of them connected to courtroom 4, connected to Judge Raymond Stanton. By the end of the 3rd week, Darnell's notebook had grown to 31 pages of documentation. Names, dates, times, quotes, patterns. A paper trail that was starting to look less like paranoia and more like evidence. Then Royce Kendrick decided to make things personal. It happened in the locker room at 6:23 p.m. after Darnell's shift had ended. Most of the other security officers had already gone home. The locker room was empty except for the buzz of fluorescent lights and the drip of a faucet that maintenance had been promising to fix for 6 months. Darnell was changing out of his uniform when the door banged open and Kendrick walked in. The shift supervisor was alone. His face was red, anger or alcohol, possibly both. His hands were clenched at his sides in a way that suggested he'd been rehearsing this confrontation in his head for a while. "Sutton," Darnell continued, unbuttoning his uniform shirt. "Kendrick, you've been asking questions." Kendrick's voice was low, dangerous. "About reassignments, about complaints, about personnel files that are none of your business. I've been having conversations with colleagues. Last I checked, that's not a policy violation." Kendrick stepped closer, close enough that Darnell could smell the whiskey on his breath, could see the broken capillaries on his nose that told a story of years of drinking to cope with whatever it was men like Kendrick needed to cope with. "Let me tell you something, boy." The word landed like a slap. Boy. Darnell's hands stopped moving. His body went very, very still. "I've been doing this job since before you were born," Kendrick continued, either oblivious to the line he'd crossed or deliberately stepping over it. "And I've seen plenty of your type come through here, thinking you're special, thinking you can rock the boat and not face consequences, thinking that just because you served in some sandbox overseas, you're entitled to respect." "I'm entitled to the same treatment as any other employee," Darnell said. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it now, something cold and hard that Kendrick should have recognized as a warning. "Nothing more, nothing less. You're entitled to whatever I say you're entitled to." Kendrick poked Darnell's chest with one finger. Once, hard. "And right now, I'm saying you're entitled to shut your mouth, do your job, and stop asking questions that make important people uncomfortable." Darnell looked down at Kendrick's finger, still pressed against his chest. Then he looked up at Kendrick's face. "Remove your hand." "Or what?" Kendrick's grin was ugly, confident. "You gonna report me?" "To who?" "Everyone in this building knows who I am, who I know. You think anyone's gonna take your word over mine?" "I think—" Darnell's hand moved fast, not to strike, but to grip Kendrick's wrist and twist it away from his body in a movement so smooth it seemed almost casual. "That you're going to remove your hand now." Kendrick yelped. The sound was high, surprised, the sound of a man who'd expected compliance and received something else entirely. "Let go of me!" He tried to pull away, but Darnell's grip was solid. Military police training. 2 tours of subduing people far more dangerous than a middle-aged shift supervisor with a drinking problem. "I'm going to say this once." Darnell's voice was quiet, controlled. "You will not touch me again. You will not call me boy. You will not threaten my career or my livelihood. And if you try any of those things again—" He leaned closer, close enough to whisper. "I will document this conversation exactly as it happened, including your use of racial slurs, and I will file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Do you understand?" Kendrick's face had gone pale. Not from pain, the grip wasn't that tight. From realization. From the dawning understanding that this particular black man wasn't going to fold the way the others had folded. "I didn't—" Kendrick swallowed. "I didn't use any slurs." "Boy." Darnell released his wrist. "Check the case law.
It qualifies." He turned back to his locker, finished changing, and gathered his things. Kendrick stood frozen, rubbing his wrist. Watching him was something that might have been fear, or might have been calculation, or might have been both. "This isn't over," Kendrick said, as Darnell reached the door. Darnell paused, looked back. "You're right," he said. "It's just beginning." He walked out, leaving Kendrick alone with the buzz of the lights and the drip of the faucet and the growing realization that he'd just made a very, very dangerous enemy. 3 days later, the first disciplinary report appeared in Darnell's file. Security Incident Report number 2024-0847. Date, current date. Reporting Officer D. Meacham. Subject Officer D.
Sutton. At approximately 1423 hours, Officer Sutton was observed leaving his assigned post at the main entrance for approximately 8 minutes without notifying dispatch. When questioned, Officer Sutton stated he needed to use the restroom. However, security logs show the nearest restroom was available within his line of sight. Additionally, Officer Sutton was observed engaging in what appeared to be personal conversations with courthouse employees during duty hours, which may have contributed to his absence from post. Recommendation: written warning for abandonment of post. Darnell read the report in Calvin Pratt's office, where he'd been summoned for a brief disciplinary meeting. "This is false," he said when he finished. Pratt's face was a mask of professional concern. "Officer Meacham's report is very detailed. Officer Meacham wasn't anywhere near the main entrance at 1423 hours. He was in courtroom 4. I know because I saw him there when I walked past on my way to my post. Officer Meacham's location isn't in dispute. I also notified dispatch before I left my post. Radio log will confirm it." Pratt's mask slipped slightly. "I'll look into that." "Please do." Darnell leaned forward. "And while you're at it, please provide me with the names of the witnesses Officer Meacham cited in his report. Because according to this," he tapped the paper, "he observed my absence personally. But if he was in courtroom 4, which is on the 4th floor, and my post was at the main entrance, which is on the 1st floor, then either he has exceptional vision or this report is fabricated." Silence. Pratt shifted in his chair. The professional concern was gone now, replaced by something more complicated, the look of a man who'd been caught in a lie but wasn't sure how to back out of it. "I'll review the radio logs," he said finally, "and clarify with Officer Meacham regarding his location at the time of the incident." "I appreciate that." Darnell stood. "I'll also be filing a formal response to this report, as is my right under Section 7.4 of the Employee Handbook. I'd like copies of all relevant documentation, including the original radio logs, within 3 business days. He walked out before Pratt could respond. In the hallway, he pulled out his notebook and wrote, "Disciplinary Report number 2024-0847, filed by D. Meacham. Report claims I abandoned post at 14:23 hours. This is false. I notified dispatch via radio at 14:21 before brief restroom break." Report also claims Meacham observed my absence, but Meacham was visibly present in courtroom 4 at that time. 4th floor versus 1st floor, physical impossibility. Radio log request submitted. Will cross-reference with courtroom 4 security footage if available. Pattern note. This is the first fabricated incident report since my reassignment from courtroom 4.
Timing suspicious. 3 days after confrontation with R. Kendrick. Documented. The radio log request came back 2 days later. Or rather, it didn't come back. From it.support@statecourts.gov to darnell.sutton@statecourts.gov. Subject: Radio log request. Date. Officer Sutton. Unfortunately, the radio logs for the date in question experienced a data corruption issue during a routine system update. The affected files cannot be recovered. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. IT support. Data corruption. Routine system update. Affected files cannot be recovered. Darnell stared at the email for a long time. Then he opened his notebook and wrote, "Radio log corrupted. Convenient timing."
This is not the first time critical documentation has been lost or corrupted when it would have supported an employee's defense against disciplinary action. See also, A. Robinson filing clerk reassignment, files misplaced. D. Foster court reporter removal. Accuracy records, unavailable for review. Pattern confirmed. Evidence that would contradict official narratives has a tendency to disappear. Documented. He closed the notebook. The written warning went into his file. Strike 1. Strike 2 came 6 weeks later, and it was almost elegant in its pettiness. Darnell had been assigned to the basement archives for the past month, a punishment detail disguised as a rotation, where his duties consisted of monitoring a hallway that no one used and a storage room that no one accessed.
It was during this assignment that his belt broke. Not dramatically, just the buckle giving way after 3 years of daily use. One moment, his equipment belt was secure. The next, it was hanging loose, the weight of his radio and flashlight pulling it down around his hips. He fixed it with a paperclip, temporary solution, enough to get through the remaining 4 hours of his shift without his equipment falling to the floor. He filed a request for a replacement belt before leaving that day. The next morning, there was a disciplinary report in his inbox. Security Incident Report number 2024-1129. Date, current date. Reporting Officer R. Kendrick. Subject Officer D. Sutton. During routine inspection at approximately 15:45 hours, Officer Sutton was observed with non-regulation equipment modification.
Specifically, Officer Sutton had secured his equipment belt with a paper clip, in violation of Uniform Standards Section 4.2.1, which requires all equipment to be maintained in working order using only approved repair methods. Officer Sutton was previously counseled on equipment maintenance during his initial assignment to Courtroom 4. Recommendation: written warning for uniform violation. Darnell read the report. Then he read Section 4.2.1 of the Uniform Standards, which said nothing about paper clips and everything about ensuring equipment functionality is maintained. His belt had been functional. His equipment had stayed in place. His appearance had been professional, more professional, arguably, than walking around with a belt that dragged on the floor. But none of that mattered. Because the point wasn't the paperclip. The point was the pattern. First strike for abandonment of post that hadn't happened. Second strike for a uniform violation that was actually a reasonable solution to an equipment failure. 2 strikes, one more, and they could fire him. He filed his response within the 5-day window. He cited the specific language of Section 4.2.1. He attached a copy of his equipment replacement request, time-stamped before the violation, was reported. He noted that he had not, in fact, been previously counseled on equipment maintenance during his courtroom 4 assignment or at any other time. The response was acknowledged, filed, and ignored. The warning went into his permanent record. Strike 2. The third strike was supposed to be the kill shot. It arrived 6 weeks after the second, in the form of an envelope in Darnell's personal mailbox at his apartment. Not his work email, not his courthouse mailbox. His personal, residential mailbox. A detail that would matter later when he started asking how anyone at the courthouse had obtained his home address from what should have been sealed personnel files. The envelope was plain white. No return address. Inside was a single document on courthouse letterhead. Termination notice. To Darnell J.
Sutton, from Office of Court Administration. Date, current date. This letter serves as official notice that your employment with the State Judicial Security Division is terminated effective date, 3 days from now, due to repeated violations of workplace policy including abandonment of post, written warning, date, uniform violation, written warning, date, insubordination toward judicial officer, verbal warning, date. You are directed to return all issued equipment and clear your personal belongings by 5 p.m. on termination date. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of final paycheck and possible legal action. Signature, purportedly from HR Director. Darnell read the letter 3 times. Then he noticed the details that didn't add up.
First, the letterhead was slightly wrong. The courthouse logo was positioned about a 1/4 inch lower than on official documents he'd seen before. Second, the signature was different from the HR Director's actual signature, which Darnell had seen on his original employment documents. Third, the verbal warning for insubordination referenced in the letter had never happened. He had no record of any verbal warning in his file, formal or informal. Fourth, termination letters were always delivered through official channels, email, certified mail, or in-person meeting with HR, never through personal mailboxes, never without a meeting to discuss the decision. This wasn't a real termination letter. This was a forgery. Someone wanted him to believe he'd been fired, wanted him to stop showing up for work, clear out his locker, disappear quietly before anyone had to go through the official process of actually firing him. Someone wanted him gone badly enough to commit what was, Darnell realized, a felony. Forgery of official documents, mail fraud, possibly identity theft if they'd accessed his personnel file to get his home address. Darnell sat at his kitchen table and felt something shift inside him. For months, he'd been playing defense, documenting incidents, filing responses, following procedures, hoping that if he just kept his head down and collected enough evidence, the system would eventually correct itself. But the system wasn't going to correct itself. The system was trying to destroy him. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized weeks ago when he'd first started researching his options. Human Resources, how may I direct your call? This is Darnell Sutton, employee number 74321. I need to verify the status of my employment. A pause. Typing sounds. 1 moment, please. Mr. Sutton, according to our records, you are currently an active employee in good standing with the Judicial Security Division. Is there a problem? I received a termination letter at my home address today. Can you confirm whether any termination action has been initiated against me? More typing. A longer pause this time. Mr. Sutton, I'm not showing any termination paperwork in your file. No separation request, no termination approval, nothing. Are you certain the letter you received was from our office? I'm becoming less certain by the minute. Can I bring the letter in for verification tomorrow morning? Absolutely. Ask for Denise in Employee Relations. She handles all termination verification. Thank you. He hung up. Then he photographed the letter from every angle. The envelope, the postmark, the paper, the signature, the logo. He sealed everything in a plastic bag to preserve any fingerprints. He wrote a detailed entry in his notebook documenting when and where he'd received the letter, what had prompted his suspicions, and what steps he'd taken to verify its authenticity. Then he made one more call. "Naomi, it's Darnell. We need to talk. In person. Tonight." They met at a diner 3 miles from the courthouse, far enough that they were unlikely to run into anyone from work, close enough that they could both get there quickly. Naomi Beaumont was already in a booth when Darnell arrived, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. She looked tired. She looked worried. She looked like someone who'd been waiting for this conversation for a long time. "Show me," she said as soon as he sat down. He slid the plastic-wrapped letter across the table. Naomi studied it for a full minute. Her face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, anger. "This is a fake," she said finally. "The logo's wrong, the signature's wrong, and this verbal warning for insubordination they're citing, there's no record of any verbal warning in your file. I checked." "You checked?" Naomi met his eyes. "I've been checking a lot of things lately. After what happened to you, after what I saw happen to the others. I started looking at patterns, pulling files, comparing timelines." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, worn, thick, filled with papers that looked like they'd been photocopied in secret. "You're not the only one, Darnell. You're just the latest." She opened the folder and spread the contents across the table. Documents, employee records, disciplinary reports, resignation letters. 14 employees in the past 10 years, Naomi said. All black, all assigned to courtroom 4 at some point. All of them either fired, forced to resign, or transferred out within 6 months of their assignment. Darnell stared at the papers, names he recognized. Angela Robinson, Thomas Williams, Danielle Foster, and others, faces he'd never met, stories he'd never heard, all of them connected by the same thread. Courtroom 4, Judge Raymond Stanton. Where did you get these? Archives, personnel files that should have been sealed. Some of them were misfiled, probably on purpose to make them harder to find. Others were in storage boxes that nobody's touched in years. Naomi's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. I've been building this file for 3 years, Darnell, waiting for someone else to see what I was seeing, waiting for someone who would actually do something about it. Why didn't you come forward yourself? Naomi's laugh was bitter. With what? Suspicions? Patterns? I don't have the smoking gun. I don't have proof that any individual termination was discriminatory. All I have is 14 people who look like us, all pushed out of the same assignment, all for performance issues that nobody can document. She tapped the folder. But you have something I don't have. You have this letter, this forgery. This is a crime, Darnell. Whoever made this document committed a felony. And if we can prove that it came from inside the courthouse, if we can connect it to Stanton or Pratt or Kendrick, then we have more than patterns. We have evidence. Darnell looked at the papers spread across the table. 14 lives, 14 careers, 14 people who'd been pushed out of their jobs because someone with power had decided they didn't belong. And now someone had tried to do the same thing to him, but they'd gotten sloppy. They'd committed a crime that could be traced. They'd given him something solid to hold on to. What happens next will change everything, but only if you're subscribed. Hit that button now, because you do not want to miss where this story goes. What do we do with this? He asked. Naomi's eyes met his. We build a case. We document everything. We find out who made that letter and how they got your address. And then, she paused, took a breath. Then we take it to someone who can actually do something about it. Who? I don't know yet. Maybe Internal Affairs, maybe the State Attorney General's office, maybe a civil rights attorney who specializes in employment discrimination. She gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. But first, we need more evidence. We need to know how deep this goes. Darnell thought about his notebook. 47 pages now, filled with names and dates and times and quotes. A paper trail that documented everything he'd witnessed, everything he'd experienced, everything that had been done to him and to others. I have records, he said, going back to my first day. Good, Naomi nodded. Keep them safe. Make copies. Store them somewhere outside your apartment. Safe deposit box, trusted friend, somewhere they can't find them even if they search your place. You think they'd search my place? I think they forged a termination letter and sent it to your home. I think they've been doing this to black employees for at least 10 years. I think they'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves. She leaned forward. And I think we're dealing with people who have a lot more to lose than just their jobs if this ever comes to light. Darnell nodded slowly. Then he picked up his coffee, long cold now, and took a sip anyway. Tell me everything you know, he said. From the beginning. Naomi told him. It took 3 hours. By the time they were done, the diner had emptied out around them, and Darnell's notebook had gained another 12 pages of notes. The war had officially begun. The next morning, Darnell walked into Human Resources at 8:15 a.m., exactly 45 minutes before his shift was scheduled to start. Denise in Employee Relations was a black woman in her 50s with natural hair going silver at the temples and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked at the forged termination letter for approximately 30 seconds before her expression shifted from professional neutrality to something colder. Where did you get this? It was delivered to my personal mailbox yesterday. No return address. She examined the envelope, the postmark, the logo placement. Her frown deepened with each detail. This isn't our letterhead. The spacing is wrong. And this signature, she pointed at the bottom of the page. This isn't HR Director Morrison's signature, not even close. That's what I suspected, but I wanted official verification. Denise looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, seeing more than just an employee with a complaint. Mr. Sutton, are you aware that forging official courthouse documents is a felony under State Criminal Code Section 473.1? I am now. And are you aware that delivery of such documents through the postal system with intent to deceive constitutes mail fraud under federal law? I suspected as much. Denise set the letter down on her desk and folded her hands over it. I've been in this department for 23 years, she said. I've seen a lot of things. People trying to extend their leave benefits with fake doctor's notes, supervisors backdating evaluations to justify raises, even a few cases of employees forging their own credentials to get promoted. She paused. But I've never seen a termination letter forged to push someone out before they could actually be fired. Is that what you think this is? I think someone wanted you gone badly enough to commit multiple felonies to make it happen. The question is who and why? Darnell met her eyes. I have some theories. I'm sure you do. Denise pulled a form from her desk drawer. I'm going to need you to fill out a formal incident report. I'm also going to need to keep this letter as evidence. I'll provide you with a certified copy for your records. I already have photographs of everything, chain of custody documentation, timestamps. Denise's eyebrows rose slightly. You're very prepared, Mr. Sutton. My father taught me to document everything. Smart man. She slid the form across the desk. Fill this out. I'll process it through official channels. But I want you to understand something. This investigation is going to take time. And whoever did this isn't going to stop just because they got caught. If anything, they'll escalate. I understand. Do you? Her voice softened slightly. Mr. Sutton, I've seen what happens to people who challenge the way things work around here. The ones who fight back. They usually lose. Not because they're wrong, but because the system is designed to protect itself. It has more resources, more time, more ways to make your life miserable than you can possibly imagine. I know. And you're going to fight anyway. It wasn't a question. Darnell thought about his father's notebooks. 27 of them, filled with a lifetime of documentation, a lifetime of small injustices that had never been made right. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone. Truth is heavier than power. It just takes longer to land. Yes, he said. I'm going to fight anyway. Denise studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Good," she said, "because I'm getting tired of watching people like you get pushed out while people like them get protected. Maybe it's time for that to change." She stamped the incident report with a date and case number. "Welcome to the fight, Mr. Sutton. Try not to get killed." The investigation into the forged letter took 6 weeks. In that time, Darnell continued working his shifts, reassigned again, this time to the night rotation at the parking garage, the graveyard shift where nothing happened and no one cared. He documented everything. He kept his head down. He waited. But he also made other moves. He filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all personnel records relating to terminations and resignations in the Judicial Security Division over the past decade. He requested copies of all complaints filed against supervisors in his chain of command. He asked for records of all email communications between Calvin Pratt, Royce Kendrick, and Judge Stanton's office. Most of his requests were denied or heavily redacted. But some things slipped through. A pattern emerged, the same pattern Naomi had shown him in the diner, but now with official documentation to back it up. 14 black employees pushed out, all from Courtroom 4 assignments, all for performance issues that had no documentation before their assignments and disappeared after their departures. The system was protecting itself, just like Denise had said. But the system had made a mistake. The forged letter. On week 6, Denise called him into her office. "We traced the document," she said. "The paper stock matches office supplies that were ordered for the court administrator's office 6 months ago. The printing characteristics match the printer in room 412, that's the administrative suite where Calvin Pratt and his staff work." Darnell felt his pulse quicken but kept his voice steady. "So someone in Pratt's office made the letter. Someone with access to that office and that printer. We can't determine exactly who yet. The printer logs from that date were unavailable. Corrupted? Conveniently deleted according to IT." Denise's voice was dry. "But the connection to that office is documented, and I've forwarded my findings to the Office of Inspector General for further investigation." The Inspector General, an independent oversight body that investigated fraud, waste, and abuse in state government. The first crack in the wall. "What happens now?" Darnell asked. "Now, the IG opens their own investigation. They'll interview witnesses, subpoena documents, dig deeper than I'm authorized to go." She paused. "But I have to warn you, these investigations take time. Months, sometimes years. And the people you're up against have been doing this for a long time. They know how to hide their tracks. I can wait." "Can you?" Denise leaned forward. "Mr. Sutton, you have 2 written warnings in your file. One more, and they can terminate you for cause. And based on what I've seen, I'd bet my pension that another warning is coming soon. They know you're not going to quit. So they're going to fire you before the investigation can conclude." She was right. Darnell knew she was right. But he also knew something else. "Then I need to file something that protects me before they can file something that destroys me," he said. Denise nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" Darnell pulled out his notebook, now 63 pages thick, and set it on her desk. A formal complaint with the Judicial Qualifications Commission, alleging a pattern of racial discrimination by Judge Raymond Stanton against black employees assigned to his courtroom in violation of the State Judicial Conduct Code. Denise stared at the notebook, then she stared at him. "You're going after a sitting judge." "I'm documenting what he's done and asking an independent body to investigate. If I'm wrong, they'll find nothing and I'll look like a disgruntled employee. If you're right, you'll have made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in this courthouse, a man with connections to the state Supreme Court, a man who's been doing this for 26 years without consequences." "I know. And you're going to do it anyway." "I'm going to document it anyway. The JQC can decide if it's worth investigating." Denise was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "There's a professor at the law school downtown, constitutional law specialist. He sometimes advises employees who are considering legal action against government entities. She slid the card across the desk. You should talk to him before you file anything. Make sure you understand what you're getting into. Darnell took the card. Professor Harold Ashby, Constitutional Law, State University School of Law. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. Denise stood, signaling that the meeting was over. Thank me when this is finished, if you're still standing. Darnell tucked the card into his pocket, gathered his notebook, and walked out of her office. He had a law professor to visit, and a war to escalate. Professor Harold Ashby's office smelled like old books and cold coffee. The walls were lined with legal texts, constitutional law treatises, Supreme Court reporters, journals with titles like Judicial Ethics Quarterly and Civil Rights Law Review. A small window overlooked the law school's courtyard, where students in expensive clothes walked between buildings that had been standing since before the Civil War. Darnell sat in a leather chair that had seen better decades, his notebook open on his knee, watching the professor read. Harold Ashby was 71 years old, 43 years teaching constitutional law, former clerk for a federal appeals court judge, author of 6 books on judicial conduct and accountability, a white man with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses who had spent his entire career studying the ways that power corrupted those who held it. He'd been reading Darnell's documentation for 27 minutes without saying a word. Finally, he set down the last page and looked up. Where did you learn to document like this? My father? Military? Survival. Darnell met the professor's eyes. He grew up in Alabama in the 50s, learned early that his word would never be enough. So he wrote everything down, taught me to do the same. Ashby nodded slowly. Smart man. He's dead now. Heart attack at 63. I'm sorry. Don't be. He'd say he died fighting. That's the only way he'd have wanted to go. Silence filled the office. Outside, a bell tower chimed the hour, 4 p.m. Darnell had been here since 2:30, walking the professor through 3 years of incidents, patterns, and evidence. Mr. Sutton, Ashby leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. Do you understand what you're asking me to help you do? I'm asking for advice on filing a complaint with the Judicial Qualifications Commission. You're asking to go to war with a sitting judge who has 26 years on the bench and connections to the state Supreme Court. Ashby's voice was matter-of-fact, not discouraging, just honest. The JQC receives hundreds of complaints every year. Most of them go nowhere. The ones that do go somewhere take years to resolve, and even when they find misconduct, the penalties are usually mild. Censure, temporary suspension, a strongly worded letter in the judge's file. And removal? Rare, very rare. In the past 20 years, this state has removed exactly 7 judges from the bench. 7, out of thousands of complaints filed. Darnell absorbed this information. He'd expected as much, had researched the statistics himself before coming here, but hearing it from an expert made it more real. So you're telling me not to file. I'm telling you to understand what you're getting into. Ashby picked up Darnell's notebook and held it up. This is extraordinary documentation. Dates, times, witnesses, patterns. You've built something here that most civil rights attorneys would kill for. But documentation isn't proof. Patterns aren't convictions. And the system you're challenging is designed to protect itself. I know. Do you? Ashby set the notebook down. Mr. Sutton, I've been studying judicial misconduct for 4 decades. I've seen cases with more evidence than yours get dismissed on technicalities. I've seen complainants lose their jobs, their reputations, their families, all because they dared to challenge someone with a robe and a gavel. The system doesn't like being questioned, and it has infinite patience for destroying the people who question it. Then why are you still doing this? The question seemed to catch Ashby off guard. He blinked, sat back in his chair, studied Darnell with new interest. Because sometimes, he said slowly, the system loses. Not often. Not easily. But sometimes Someone comes along who's too stubborn to quit, too careful to make mistakes, and too patient to let them wait him out. Someone who understands that justice isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. A marathon that might take years, decades even. I can run that marathon. Can you? Ashby's eyes were sharp, assessing. You're 32 years old. You have a job that barely pays your rent and a target on your back that's only going to get bigger. The people you're challenging have resources you can't imagine. They will make your life miserable. They will try to break you. They will use every tool at their disposal to make you disappear. They've already tried. Darnell thought about the forged letter, the fabricated incident reports, the radio logs that conveniently disappeared. I'm still here? Yes. Ashby's expression shifted, something that might have been respect flickering behind the professorial skepticism. Yes, you are. He stood and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down a thick volume bound in red leather. The Judicial Qualifications Commission operates under a specific set of rules. Complaints must be filed in a particular format, with specific types of supporting documentation. Most complainants don't know this. They submit emotional letters full of accusations but light on evidence, and the complaints get dismissed for technical deficiencies. He set the book on the desk in front of Darnell. This is the JQC's procedural manual. It's technically public information, but they don't exactly advertise it. Study it. Learn the rules. File your complaint exactly according to their specifications, with documentation that meets their evidentiary standards. Darnell took the book. It was heavy, at least 500 pages. And one more thing. Ashby sat back down, his voice dropping. The JQC's proceedings are confidential. They don't publicize complaints, they don't announce investigations, and they don't discuss pending cases. But they do have a weakness. What's that? They rely on the media for pressure. A complaint that gets filed and forgotten is a complaint that goes nowhere. But a complaint that gets public attention, that gets covered by journalists, discussed by legal commentators, debated by the public, that's a complaint the JQC can't ignore. You're telling me to talk to reporters. I'm telling you that justice doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when people are watching. Ashby smiled, a thin, knowing smile. I know a few journalists who might be interested in a story about a sitting judge with a pattern of pushing black employees out of his courtroom. Would you like me to make some introductions? Darnell thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, he said, I would. The JQC complaint took Darnell 6 weeks to prepare. He worked on it every night after his shifts, sitting at his kitchen table with Professor Ashby's procedural manual open beside him, cross-referencing every requirement against his documentation. Format specifications, evidentiary standards, citation requirements. The bureaucratic maze that most complainants never navigated successfully. He navigated it. Judicial Qualifications Commission formal complaint. Complainant, Darnell J. Sutton. Subject, Honorable Raymond E. Stanton, Circuit Court Judge. Date filed. Date. Summary of allegations. Pattern of racial discrimination in treatment of courthouse employees assigned to Courtroom 4 over a period of at least 10 years, in violation of State Judicial Conduct Code Rule 2.3, Bias, Prejudice, and Harassment. Supporting documentation. 47 exhibits attached, including personnel records of 14 employees, Exhibits A1 through A14. Disciplinary reports with inconsistencies documented, Exhibits B1 through B23. FOIA responses showing pattern of reassignment, Exhibits C1 through C7. Witness statements from former employees, Exhibits D1 through D8. Analysis of forged termination letter, Exhibit E. Timeline of documented incidents, Exhibit F. He filed it on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivering 3 copies to the JQC's office in the state capitol, one for the file, one for the investigator, one for his own records with a timestamp receipt. The clerk who accepted the filing looked at the thickness of the complaint, nearly 200 pages with exhibits, and raised her eyebrows. This is comprehensive. I wanted to be thorough. She stamped the receipt and handed it back to him. You'll receive written acknowledgement within 30 days. If the commission decides to open an investigation, you'll be notified of next steps. Thank you. Darnell walked out of the building with the receipt in his pocket and the knowledge that he'd just declared war on a sitting judge. Now he needed reinforcements. Allegra Banks called him 3 days later. Mr. Sutton, this is Allegra Banks. I'm an investigative reporter with the Capital Tribune. Professor Ashby suggested I reach out to you. Her voice was professional but curious, the voice of someone who'd been doing this long enough to recognize a good story when it landed in her lap. I've been expecting your call. I understand you filed a complaint with the Judicial Qualifications Commission regarding Judge Raymond Stanton. I'd like to hear more about it. The complaint itself is confidential, JQC rules. I know, but the underlying facts aren't confidential, are they? The things that happened to you, the pattern you've documented, those are your experiences to share. Darnell considered his options. Professor Ashby had been clear. Public pressure was essential. The JQC could bury complaints that nobody knew about. They couldn't bury complaints that were front-page news. Can we meet in person? Off the record first, until I understand what you're planning to do with the information. Absolutely. Tomorrow, noon, there's a coffee shop called Meridian on State Street. I'll be the one with the red notebook. Red notebook? Allegra laughed. We all have our documentation systems, Mr. Sutton. See you tomorrow. Allegra Banks was not what Darnell had expected. He'd imagined someone older, harder, a battle-scarred veteran of investigative journalism with gray hair and a permanent frown. Instead, the woman sitting in the coffee shop with a red notebook was maybe 35, black, with natural hair pulled back in a professional style and eyes that missed nothing. You're surprised, she said, as he sat down across from her. I expected someone white, male, older. Her smile was knowing. Everyone does. That's actually an advantage in my line of work. People underestimate me. They say things in front of me they wouldn't say in front of someone who looks like them. I can relate. I know. She opened her red notebook to a fresh page. I've done some background research since our call. Darnell Jerome Sutton, 32 years old, Army Military Police, 2 tours in Iraq, honorably discharged with commendations, hired by State Judicial Security 3 years ago, assigned to Courtroom 4 8 months ago, reassigned after 11 days, currently working night shift in the parking garage. You've been thorough. It's my job. She met his eyes. I've also pulled public records on Judge Raymond Stanton, 26 years on the bench, consistently rated highly effective by the State Bar Association, major donor to 3 governors' campaigns, sits on the board of the State Judicial Conference, and according to FOIA responses I obtained last year while working on a different story, has had 17 complaints filed against him with the JQC over the past decade. 17. All dismissed. Insufficient evidence. Failure to meet procedural requirements. Complainant failed to respond to follow-up inquiry. Allegra's voice was flat, reciting facts without editorial. The pattern is clear, Mr. Sutton. Complaints go in, complaints disappear. The system protects its own. So why are you interested in my complaint? Because yours is different. She leaned forward. Yours has documentation. Yours has witnesses willing to talk. Yours has a forged termination letter that's currently under investigation by the Inspector General, and yours has something the other 17 complaints didn't have. What's that? Me. Allegra smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of a hunter who'd spotted prey. I've been investigating judicial misconduct in this state for 6 years. I've written about corrupt prosecutors, biased judges, crooked court administrators. And I've been waiting for the right case to blow the lid off the JQC's habit of burying complaints against powerful judges. She tapped her notebook. Your case is that case, Mr. Sutton. If you're willing to go public. If you're willing to let me tell your story. Darnell thought about it, about the risk, about the exposure, about what it would mean to have his name in the newspaper, attached to accusations against a judge who had powerful friends and a long memory. Then he thought about his father's notebooks, 27 of them, filled with documentation that had never seen the light of day, evidence of injustice that had died with him, unseen and unchanged. "Tell me what you need," he said. Allegra's smile widened. "Everything," she said. "I need everything." If you're invested in Darnell's fight for justice, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next will blow your mind. The story broke 4 months later. Capital Tribune, investigative report. Pattern of discrimination inside one judge's courtroom by Allegra Banks. For more than a decade, Black employees assigned to Courtroom 4 have faced a gauntlet of fabricated complaints, mysterious reassignments, and career-ending disciplinary actions. At the center of it all, Judge Raymond Stanton. The article was 12,000 words long. It named 14 former employees. It included excerpts from disciplinary reports that contradicted documented facts. It quoted 3 supervisors, anonymously, who confirmed that Judge Stanton had personally requested the removal of Black employees from his courtroom. And it quoted Darnell Sutton by name. "I was told to not stand out," Sutton said in an interview. The problem was, in Judge Stanton's courtroom, existing while Black was already standing out too much. The reaction was immediate. Within 24 hours, the JQC announced that it was reviewing the complaint filed by Darnell Sutton. Within 48 hours, Judge Stanton's office released a statement calling the article a collection of baseless accusations by disgruntled former employees. Within 72 hours, the State Attorney General's office announced that it was monitoring the situation. And within 1 week, Darnell Sutton was fired. The termination meeting happened on a Friday at 4:30 p.m., late enough that most employees had already left, early enough that it couldn't be called after-hours retaliation. Calvin Pratt was there. Royce Kendrick was there. A woman from Human Resources whom Darnell had never met was there, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Sutton?" Pratt's voice was smooth, professional, completely empty. "This meeting is to inform you that your employment with the State Judicial Security Division is terminated, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" "Repeated violations of workplace policy, including abandonment of post, uniform violations, and insubordination." "I've responded to all of those allegations in writing. My responses document that each accusation was false or fabricated." "Your responses have been reviewed and found unpersuasive." Pratt slid a document across the table. "This is your separation agreement. If you sign it, you'll receive 2 weeks severance pay and a neutral reference for future employment." Darnell looked at the document without touching it. "And if I don't sign?" "Then you'll receive no severance, and your employment record will reflect termination for cause." Kendrick was smiling. The HR woman was writing furiously. Pratt's face was a mask of professional indifference. They thought they'd won. "I'm not signing anything," Darnell said, "without consulting with my attorney." "You have an attorney?" "I do now." Darnell stood. "You'll be hearing from her shortly, along with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the State Human Rights Commission, and the Federal Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division." He walked out before they could respond. Behind him, he heard Kendrick's voice. "He's bluffing. There's no way he can afford—" The door closed, cutting off the rest. Darnell walked through the empty hallway, past the security desk where he'd spent so many hours, past the elevator bank, past the courtroom where this had all begun. He pushed through the main entrance and stepped out into the afternoon sun. His career as a courthouse security guard was over. His career as something else was just beginning. The lawsuit was filed 6 weeks later. Sutton v. State Judicial Security Division, et al., complaint for violation of civil rights, under 42 U.S.C. Sefer 1983. Defendants, State Judicial Security Division, Calvin Pratt, individually and in his official capacity. Royce Kendrick, individually and in his official capacity, honorers. Raymond Stanton, individually. The attorney was Elena Vasquez, a civil rights litigator who'd seen Allegra Banks's article and reached out to Darnell the same day. She worked on contingency, which meant she didn't get paid unless he won. She also worked on anger, which meant she fought like the outcome was personal. "They're going to try to settle," she told him in their first meeting. "They'll offer you money to go away, to sign a confidentiality agreement, to shut up and disappear." "I'm not interested in disappearing." "Good, because I'm not interested in helping you disappear." Elena's eyes were dark and fierce. "I'm interested in making them pay. Not just money. Accountability. I want depositions. I want discovery. I want every email they ever sent about you on the public record. Even if it takes years? Even if it takes decades?" She smiled, a predator's smile. "I've been doing this for 20 years, Mr. Sutton. I've learned that the only way to change a broken system is to expose it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I intend to flood these people with sunlight until they burn." Darnell thought about his father's notebooks, about the truth that had died with him, unseen and unchanged. "Then let's burn them," he said. The lawsuit dragged on for 3 years. Discovery, depositions, motions to dismiss, motions to compel, appeals, counter-appeals. The endless bureaucratic warfare of the American legal system, designed to exhaust anyone who dared to challenge the powerful. During those 3 years, Darnell did something he'd been planning since before the firing. He went to law school. The acceptance letter from State University had arrived 2 weeks after his termination, the result of an application he'd submitted quietly, at night, while still working the parking garage shift. Professor Ashby had written his recommendation letter. His LSAT scores were in the 93rd percentile. His personal statement was a single page about documentation, about truth, about the notebooks his father had kept for 40 years. He started classes in the fall. He worked part-time as a paralegal in Elena Vasquez's office to pay his bills. He studied constitutional law with Professor Ashby, who had become something between a mentor and a friend. He graduated in the top 10% of his class, passed the bar on his first attempt, and was admitted to practice law in the state of his birth. The lawsuit settled the same month he got his bar license. The terms were confidential, a requirement Darnell had resisted but ultimately accepted, because the alternative was another 2 years of litigation with no guaranteed outcome. But the settlement was substantial, enough to pay off his student loans, enough to set aside savings, enough to start his own practice. And the JQC investigation continued. The investigation took 7 years. 7 years of interviews, document reviews, witness depositions. 7 years of Judge Stanton's lawyers filing motions to dismiss, claiming lack of evidence, procedural errors, constitutional violations. 7 years of the JQC slowly, methodically building a case that could withstand any appeal. During those 7 years, Darnell built something too. A law practice. Specializing in employment discrimination, civil rights, and, increasingly, judicial accountability. Clients came to him because of the Tribune article, because of the lawsuit, because word spread that there was a black lawyer who knew how to document, how to fight, how to outlast the system. He won cases. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. A discrimination suit against a county school board, a civil rights case against a police department, a class action against a state agency that had systematically denied promotions to qualified black employees. Each victory was documented. Each victory was precedent. Each victory was another brick in a wall he was building, a wall that would eventually be high enough to climb. The JQC issued its preliminary findings in year 7. The Commission finds probable cause to believe that Judge Raymond E. Stanton engaged in a pattern of conduct constituting racial discrimination against African American employees assigned to his courtroom in violation of Rule 2.3 of the State Judicial Conduct Code. Probable cause, not a final ruling, just a determination that there was enough evidence to move forward with formal proceedings. Judge Stanton's lawyers appealed. The appeals took 2 more years. And during those 2 years, something happened that no one, least of all Darnell Sutton, had expected. He got into politics. It started with a speech. A civil rights organization had invited Darnell to speak at their annual conference. just a 15-minute presentation about judicial accountability, about documentation, about the long fight for justice. He'd expected an audience of maybe 200 people, lawyers, activists, academics. The speech went viral. Someone recorded it on their phone and posted it online. Within a week, it had been viewed 3 million times. Within a month, Darnell was being interviewed on national news programs, asked to comment on judicial reform, invited to testify before legislative committees. And then came the phone call. "Mr. Sutton, this is Marcus Webb. I'm the state party chairman. I'd like to talk to you about running for office." Darnell had laughed, actually laughed. "I'm a lawyer, not a politician." "You're a symbol," Webb said. "You're the guy who took on a corrupt judge and won. You're the guy who documented everything, filed the complaint, built the case. Do you know how many people in this state have been waiting for someone like you? Someone like me? Someone who fights back. Someone who doesn't quit. Someone who can look voters in the eye and say, 'I've been where you are and I know how to win.'" Darnell thought about it for 3 days. Then he said yes. The campaign for state senate was brutal. His opponent was a 3-term incumbent with deep pockets and deeper connections. Attack ads painted Darnell as a radical, a troublemaker, a man with a grudge against law enforcement. They dug up everything they could find: his termination from courthouse security, presented without context; his lawsuit, presented as frivolous; his activism, presented as extremism. Darnell responded with documentation. Every accusation was answered with facts. Every attack ad was rebutted with evidence. Every attempt to distort his record was met with the same patient, methodical truth-telling he'd learned from his father's notebooks. He won by 7 points. And then he kept winning. 2 terms in the state senate. Then a term as state attorney general, where he created the first judicial accountability division in the state's history. And then, 17 years after Judge Raymond Stanton had pointed at him and said, "Get him out," Darnell Sutton stood on a stage and accepted his party's nomination for governor. He won that race by 12 points, the largest margin of victory in a gubernatorial election in 40 years. 17 years. The thought echoed through Darnell's mind as he sat behind the mahogany desk in the governor's private office, staring at the folder in front of him. 17 years since "Get him out." 17 years since the forged letter, the fabricated complaints, the night shifts in empty parking garages. 17 years of documentation, litigation, legislation, and, finally, election. And now, this folder. Red cover, gold seal, the kind of folder that contained decisions no one else could make. State Judicial Qualifications. Commission. Final recommendation. In the matter of Honorable Raymond E. Stanton. Case number JQC 2024-0847. Darnell opened it. After 14 months of formal proceedings, including review of over 2,300 documents, testimony from 31 witnesses, and analysis of personnel records spanning 22 years, this commission finds: 1. Judge Stanton engaged in a persistent pattern of racial discrimination against African American courthouse employees in violation of Rule 2.3 of the State Judicial Conduct Code. 2. At least 14 employees were subjected to unfounded disciplinary actions, fabricated complaints, or constructive dismissal during their assignments to Courtroom 4. 3.
Judge Stanton was aware of, and in some cases directly participated in, the creation of false documentation to justify adverse employment actions. Recommendation: removal from the bench pursuant to State Constitution Article 7, Section 12. This recommendation is submitted to the governor for final action. Darnell read the recommendation 3 times. Then he read the exhibits, the witness statements, the personnel records, the email chains that the JQC had finally obtained through subpoena, emails that Judge Stanton's lawyers had fought for years to keep sealed. One email in particular caught his attention. From r.stanton@statecourts.gov to d.meacham@statecourts.gov. Date 17 years ago. Subject: Sutton situation. Desmond: I need something in writing by end of week.
Anything that can go in his file. Abandonment of post, dress code, whatever works. Make it stick. RS. Make it stick. 3 words that had haunted Darnell for 17 years. 3 words that had been the foundation of every fabricated complaint, every mysterious data corruption, every convenient disappearance of evidence that would have proven his innocence. Now those 3 words were going to end a career. Darnell closed the folder. Then he called his chief of staff. "Schedule the public hearing," he said. "Judge Stanton is going to have his day in court, and I'm going to be the one presiding." The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the state capitol's largest conference room. Room 214 had been designed for legislative hearings, rows of seats facing a raised platform, microphones at witness tables, cameras positioned to capture every angle. It could hold 300 people, and today every seat was filled. Journalists occupied the first 3 rows. Former courthouse employees, the 14 victims documented in the JQC report, sat together in a block near the center. Legal observers, civil rights advocates, and interested citizens filled the remaining seats. And in the back row, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands, sat an elderly black woman with silver hair and familiar eyes. Darnell's mother had insisted on being here. "I watched your father fight his whole life and never see justice," she'd said when he tried to convince her to stay home. "I'm not missing this. Not for anything." At 10 a.m. exactly, Darnell entered the room. He was wearing a dark suit, white shirt, no tie, the uniform of authority without the pretension of ceremony. He took his seat at the center of the raised platform, flanked by his legal counsel and the JQC's chief investigator. The room fell silent. "This hearing is called to order." Darnell's voice carried clearly through the microphones. "We are here to consider the Judicial Qualifications Commission's recommendation regarding the Honorable Raymond E. Stanton, Circuit Court Judge. Under the state constitution, the governor is required to review JQC recommendations and make a final determination regarding judicial removal." He looked toward the defense table, where Judge Stanton sat with his attorney. The man had aged. 78 now, his hair gone white, his face lined with decades of wielding power unchallenged. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, certain of their own righteousness. Those eyes widened when they met Darnell's. "Before we proceed," Darnell continued, "I want to address a potential concern. Judge Stanton's counsel has filed a motion arguing that I should recuse myself from these proceedings due to a conflict of interest, specifically that I was one of the original complainants against Judge Stanton 17 years ago." He held up a document. "The State Ethics Commission has issued an advisory opinion on this matter. I'll read the relevant portion. The governor's prior complainant status does not create a disqualifying conflict of interest under State Ethics Code Section 14.3. The JQC conducted an independent investigation with evidence from 31 witnesses and over 2,300 documents. The governor's role is ministerial, to accept or reject the commission's recommendation based on its independent findings, not on his personal experience." He set the document down. "The motion to recuse is denied. We will proceed." Stanton's attorney stood. "Governor, this is highly irregular. Your client will have ample opportunity to present his defense. That's why we're here." Darnell's voice was calm, controlled, the same voice he'd used 32 years old, standing in a courtroom doorway while a judge demanded his removal. "Counselor, you may make your opening statement when we reach that portion of the proceedings. For now, please be seated." The attorney sat. Stanton's face had gone pale. This is the moment 17 years in the making. If you want to see how it ends, make sure you're subscribed, because justice is about to be served. The hearing lasted 6 hours. The JQC's chief investigator presented the findings first. Documents were entered into evidence, emails were read aloud, personnel records were displayed on screens for the room to see. 14 names, 14 careers. 14 people who had been pushed out of their jobs because one man had decided their presence was intolerable. Then the witnesses testified. Thomas Williams, the janitor who'd been reprimanded for non-existent streaks on windows. 63 now, retired, speaking publicly for the first time about what had happened to him. "I cleaned that building for 9 years," he said, his voice steady despite the cameras. "Every time I got assigned to the 4th floor, something went wrong. Streaks on windows that weren't there, scuff marks on floors I hadn't touched. It was like clockwork, every single time." Angela Robinson, the filing clerk who'd been sent to the basement for disorganized files. 42 now, working as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. "My files were perfect," she said. 6 years of perfect evaluations. Then 2 weeks in courtroom 4, and suddenly I couldn't alphabetize? I knew what was happening. Everyone knew. But nobody could prove it. Danielle Foster, the court reporter with the 98.4% accuracy rating, 50 now, still working as a court reporter in another county. "Judge Stanton told my supervisor, and I'm quoting, 'I don't want that woman in my courtroom. Find someone who can actually do the job.' My accuracy rating was the highest in the department, the highest. But I was that woman because of how I looked." One by one, they told their stories. 14 witnesses, 14 testimonies, 14 pieces of a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for 2 decades. And then it was Judge Stanton's turn. His attorney made the opening statement, claimed the allegations were baseless, claimed the witnesses were disgruntled former employees with personal vendettas, claimed the emails had been taken out of context, the personnel records misinterpreted, the entire investigation a politically motivated attack on a distinguished jurist. "This is a witch hunt," the attorney concluded. "Pure and simple. Governor Sutton has a personal grudge against my client, and he's using the power of his office to pursue it. This hearing is a farce, and this recommendation should be rejected." Darnell waited until the attorney finished. Then he spoke. "Counselor, you've made serious accusations about the integrity of this proceeding. I'd like to give your client the opportunity to address the specific evidence against him. Judge Stanton, would you like to testify?" The room held its breath. Stanton leaned toward his attorney, whispered something. The attorney shook his head. Another whispered exchange. Then Stanton stood. "I'll testify," he said. "I have nothing to hide." He walked to the witness table with the confidence of a man who'd spent 26 years commanding courtrooms. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at Darnell. "Ask your questions, Governor." Darnell opened the folder in front of him. "Judge Stanton, I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 47. This is an email dated 17 years ago, sent from your official court email address to Desmond Meacham, the bailiff assigned to your courtroom. The subject line is R.E. Sutton situation. Do you recognize this email?" Stanton glanced at the screen where the email was displayed. "I sent thousands of emails over my career. I don't remember every one." "Let me refresh your memory," Darnell read aloud. "Desmond, I need something in writing by end of week. Anything that can go in his file. Abandonment of post, dress code, whatever works. Make it stick." He looked up. "Do you remember writing those words?" "That email has been taken out of context. What context would justify instructing a subordinate to fabricate disciplinary documentation against an employee?" "I wasn't instructing anyone to fabricate anything. I was asking for documentation of legitimate concerns." "What concerns?" "Performance concerns. Attitude concerns. The same concerns any supervisor would have about a problematic employee." "Can you identify any specific performance issue that justified your concern about Darnell Sutton, other than his presence in your courtroom?" Silence. "Judge Stanton?" "He was..." Stanton's jaw tightened. "He was not a good fit for my courtroom." "Not a good fit." Darnell let the words hang in the air. "That's an interesting phrase. It appears in several of the personnel documents related to black employees who were removed from courtroom 4 assignments. Not a good fit. Not meeting standards. Performance concerns. But in none of these documents is there a single specific incident cited. No particular failure, no documented mistake, just vague concerns about fit. I had high standards for my courtroom. Your standards seem to have applied differently to different employees." Darnell picked up another document. "According to personnel records, White employees assigned to your courtroom had an average tenure of 4.7 years. Black employees had an average tenure of 8.3 months. Can you explain that disparity? Coincidence. Different skill levels. Different. 14 black employees in 10 years, Judge Stanton. All removed or forced out within months of their assignment. All with sudden performance issues that appeared only after they started working in your courtroom. All with those issues mysteriously disappearing after they were gone. Stanton's face had gone from pale to red. I don't have to sit here and be accused. Actually, you do. Darnell's voice hardened. That's why we're here. Because for 26 years, you sat on a bench and judged others. Now it's your turn to be judged. He held up one more document. This is a memo from the Office of Court Administration dated 15 years ago. It was sent to you by Calvin Pratt, then the court administrator. The subject line is Long-Term Staffing Concerns, Courtroom 4. It was heavily redacted in the FOIA response we obtained during the initial investigation, but the JQC was able to obtain an unredacted copy through subpoena. He read aloud. Judge Stanton, per our conversation, I've instructed HR to expedite the reassignment of current personnel and adjust future rotation schedules to meet your preferences. As discussed, this arrangement will continue until further notice. All documentation will be handled through the usual channels. Darnell looked up. Your preferences. The usual channels. Would you like to explain what those phrases mean, Judge Stanton? Stanton's hands were shaking. His attorney was half standing, ready to object but unsure on what grounds. That memo was about operational efficiency, nothing more. Operational efficiency that resulted in 14 black employees being pushed out of your courtroom over a decade? I didn't push anyone out. They failed to meet standards. What standards? Darnell stood. His voice rose for the first time, not a shout, but a command. Name one. Name one specific, documented, verified standard that any of these 14 employees failed to meet. One incident. One mistake. One legitimate reason. Silence. You can't. Darnell sat back down. Because there wasn't one. There was only your preference not to see certain faces in your courtroom. Your preference to be surrounded by people who looked like you. Your preference to use your power to remove anyone who made you uncomfortable by the simple act of existing. He closed the folder. I have no more questions for this witness. Stanton's attorney attempted a redirect. It didn't go well. Every point he tried to make was countered by documentation. Every denial was contradicted by evidence. Every attempt to paint Stanton as a victim of political persecution crumbled against the weight of 14 testimonies, 22 years of records, and one 3-word email that captured everything. Make it stick. At 4:30 p.m., after 6 hours of testimony, Darnell called for a brief recess. When the hearing resumed, he made his ruling. Based on the evidence presented today, including the JQC's 14-month investigation, the testimony of 31 witnesses and Judge Stanton's own statements, I find that the Commission's recommendation is supported by clear and convincing evidence. He paused, letting the words settle. Judge Raymond E. Stanton engaged in a persistent pattern of racial discrimination against black employees assigned to his courtroom in violation of Rule 2.3 of the State Judicial Conduct Code. He participated in the creation of false documentation to justify adverse employment actions against employees whose only offense was their presence. He used the power of his position to systematically exclude qualified individuals from opportunities they had earned solely because of the color of their skin. Stanton was staring at him now, not with anger, with something else. Something that might have been fear, or might have been the dawning recognition of consequences he'd spent 26 years believing would never come. The JQC's recommendation for removal is accepted. Darnell picked up a pen. Executive Order 734. Effective immediately, Raymond E. Stanton is removed from the bench of the State Circuit Court, pursuant to Article 7, Section 12 of the State Constitution. He signed his name. The room erupted. Journalists rushed toward the door, phones already pressed to ears. The former employees embraced each other, tears streaming down faces that had waited decades for this moment. Stanton's attorney was demanding to know about appeals, about due process, about everything except the evidence that had just destroyed his client's career. And in the back row, an elderly black woman with silver hair pressed her hand to her heart and whispered words that no one else could hear. Words meant for a husband who'd died at 63, his notebooks filled with documentation that never saw justice. "He did it," she whispered. "Our boy did it." The aftermath was not what the headlines promised. Justice, Darnell had learned, was never as clean as the stories made it sound. Stanton was removed from the bench. That much was certain. The executive order was immediate and irrevocable. His pension was forfeit under the state's judicial misconduct statute. He faced a civil lawsuit from the 14 former employees, which would likely result in a substantial settlement. But criminal charges were another matter. The state attorney general's office reviewed the evidence and concluded that while Stanton's conduct was deeply troubling, most of the specific acts fell outside the statute of limitations. The forged termination letter, the clearest crime in the entire pattern, couldn't be directly attributed to Stanton himself. It had been created in Calvin Pratt's office, using Pratt's printer, but Pratt claimed ignorance and there was no direct evidence linking Stanton to the forgery. Pratt himself received a written reprimand for failure to adequately investigate internal complaints. He kept his job. His pension was secure. His next promotion was delayed by 2 years, an inconvenience, not a consequence. Royce Kendrick had retired 5 years earlier with full benefits. The statute of limitations on his harassment had long since expired. He would face no consequences whatsoever. Desmond Meacham, the bailiff who had written the fabricated incident reports, who had received the "make it stick" email, resigned before he could be fired. He was not charged with any crime. His personnel file would note voluntary resignation, nothing more. Phyllis Drummond continued working as a deputy clerk. No action was taken against her because, according to the investigation, her role was limited to administrative functions. This was how the system protected itself. Not through dramatic confrontations, not through villains getting their comeuppance, but through quiet settlements, strategic retirements, and statutes of limitations that let the guilty escape while the innocent were still gathering evidence. Darnell understood this. He'd always understood it. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a direction. You could move toward it, fight for it, document the distance between where you were and where you should be, but you could never fully arrive. The system was too big, too old, too invested in its own preservation. All you could do was make it a little better than you found it, and hope the next generation would take it further. 1 week after the hearing, a folder appeared on Darnell's desk. Gray cover, no seal, the kind of folder that held things people wanted to keep hidden. It had been delivered by Carmen Delgado, the JQC's chief investigator. She'd asked to meet with him privately, and when she'd handed over the folder, her face had carried the weight of something she couldn't quite name. "We found this during the investigation," she said. "It was outside the scope of our mandate. The complaint was about discriminatory treatment of employees, not financial misconduct, so we couldn't include it in our official findings." "What is it?" "Suspicious financial transactions between Judge Stanton and 3 courthouse contractors over a 15-year period. Payments that don't match any documented services. Shell companies registered to addresses that don't exist. The kind of pattern that usually indicates corruption, not just bias." Darnell opened the folder, skimmed the first few pages, felt his pulse quicken at what he saw. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because we forwarded it to the state attorney general's office 6 months ago." Delgado's voice was flat. "They declined to investigate, said it was insufficiently developed and outside their current priorities." "The AG is elected next year." "Yes, he is." Delgado met his eyes. "And Judge Stanton was a major donor to his last 3 campaigns." Darnell closed the folder, the system protecting itself. Again. Still. Always. "What do you want me to do with this?" "Whatever you think is right." Delgado stood to leave. "You're the governor now. You have resources the rest of us don't, and you have a reputation for not letting things go." She paused at the door. Stanton may be off the bench, but whoever was paying him, and whoever was being paid, they're still out there, still operating, still protected by the same system that protected him for 26 years. She left. Darnell sat alone with the folder. 17 years. One judge removed, one pattern exposed. One small victory in a war that would never really end. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out something he hadn't looked at in months. His notebook. The original one. Worn cover. Yellowed pages. 47 entries documenting incidents from his time as a courthouse security guard. The first entry was dated 17 years ago, written in the hallway outside courtroom 4. Day 1, 08:47 hours. Courtroom 4. Judge R. Stanton pointed at me and asked, "Who allowed that person into my courtroom?" Witnesses: P. Drummond, D. Meacham, C. Pratt. No stated reason for objection to my presence. Documented. Darnell turned to the last page, found a blank space, picked up his pen. Day 6/205, 18:47 hours. Governor's office. Signed executive order removing Judge R. Stanton from bench. 17 years, 4 months, 12 days since first incident. 14 victims identified. 2,347 pages of evidence. 31 witnesses. Justice, partial. System, unchanged. Fight, ongoing. Additional evidence of financial misconduct forwarded by JQC. AG declined investigation. Pattern suggests broader corruption network. Next steps, undetermined. Documented. He closed the notebook. Then he opened his desk drawer again and pulled out something new. A fresh notebook. Black cover. Spiral bound. 80 blank pages waiting to be filled. His father had kept 27 notebooks over 40 years. Darnell was only on his 15th. He had a long way to go. That night, his phone buzzed with a call from a number he knew by heart. "Darnell?" Naomi Beaumont's voice came through the speaker. Older now, but still carrying the same mix of warmth and steel. "I just watched the news. I can believe it. I always believed it. But seeing it actually happen, it happened." Darnell was sitting in his home office, the signed executive order framed on his desk, the gray folder locked in his safe. "After 17 years, it finally happened. Your father would be proud. I know." A pause. The sound of someone trying to find words that would capture a moment too big for language. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Naomi asked. "That first night we met, in the diner, when I showed you the files I'd been keeping? I asked what we should do with them. And I said we should build a case, document everything, find out how deep it goes." Her laugh was soft, remembering. "I never imagined it would go this deep, or take this long, or end up here." "Neither did I." "Liar." She was smiling. He could hear it in her voice. "You knew. Even then you knew you weren't going to stop until something changed. I saw it in your eyes that night, that same look your father probably had. The look of someone who's decided that outlasting them isn't enough. You have to outlive them." Darnell thought about his father's notebooks, about the documentation that had died with him, unseen and unchanged, about the promise he'd made to himself, standing in that locker room 17 years ago, that his truth would not disappear the same way. "Naomi, I need to ask you something. Anything. Are you still keeping files?" A pause. Then, "You know I am." "On who?" "On everyone." Her voice dropped. Darnell, Stanton wasn't operating alone. Wasn't. Pratt, Kendrick, Meacham, they were the visible faces. But there were others. People who signed off on reassignments without asking questions. People who lost evidence at convenient moments. people who looked the other way for decades because looking the other way was easier than looking at what was actually happening. I got a folder today, financial records, suspicious transactions that the AG declined to investigate. I know about those transactions. Naomi's voice was careful now. I've known about them for years. I just didn't have anyone to tell who could actually do something. You have someone now. Silence on the line. The weight of years of frustration, years of documentation, years of waiting for someone who could turn evidence into action. What do you need? Naomi asked finally. Everything you have, everything you've kept, every file, every note, every pattern you've documented since this began. That's a lot of paper. I've got a lot of storage space. Darnell looked at the gray folder locked in his safe, and a lot of unfinished business. This won't end with Stanton, will it? No. Darnell picked up the fresh notebook, ran his thumb along the spine. It won't end at all. The system is too big, too old, too protected. All we can do is keep pushing, keep documenting, keep fighting, and hope that someday someone will pick up where we leave off. Your father's notebooks, Naomi said softly. You're trying to make sure they didn't die with him. I'm trying to make sure mine don't die with me. Another pause. Then Naomi's voice came back, stronger now, resolved. I'll have everything couriered to your office by Friday. And Darnell? Yeah? Thank you. For not giving up. For not letting them win. For being the person your father taught you to be. Darnell closed his eyes, thought about his father's notebooks, about his mother in the back row of the hearing, pressing her hand to her heart, about the 14 people who'd finally been heard after decades of silence. Thank him, Darnell said. He did all the hard work. I just finished what he started. He hung up. Then he opened the fresh notebook to the first page and wrote, Day 1, New Investigation. Subject, Financial transactions involving former Judge R. Stanton and unknown parties. Evidence received from JQC investigator C. Delgado. Additional documentation expected from N. Beaumont. AG declined to investigate. Possible conflict of interest. Campaign contributions. Pattern suggests broader corruption network. Scope, unknown. Timeline, unknown. Parties involved, unknown. Next steps. Review all available evidence. Identify patterns. Build case. The fight continues. Documented. The text message arrived at 11:47 p.m. Darnell was about to go to bed, his first night of real sleep in weeks, now that the hearing was over and the order was signed. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he almost ignored it. Then he saw the sender. Unknown number. He opened the message. Congratulations, Governor. Stanton was just the beginning. The real names are still in that sealed folder. Sleep well. Darnell stared at the screen, read the message again, then again. Someone knew about the folder. Someone who wasn't Carmen Delgado, who wouldn't have sent an anonymous text. Someone who had access to information that should have been confidential. Someone who wanted him to know that he was being watched, or someone who wanted him to keep digging. He thought about calling his security detail, about tracing the number, about the dozen rational, cautious responses that a governor should have to an anonymous threat. Instead, he picked up his notebook, turned to the next blank page, wrote, Unknown contact, 23:47 hours. Anonymous text message, sealed folder. Message implies knowledge of JQC investigation materials that should be confidential. Tone ambiguous, could be threat or encouragement. Sender unknown. Number untraceable. Likely burner phone. Preserved for documentation. He looked at the words on the page. Then he looked at the framed photograph on his nightstand. His father, 30 years younger, holding a notebook of his own. You were right, Dad, he said quietly. They never stop, and neither do we. He set down his pen, turned off the light, and slept the sleep of a man who knew that tomorrow would bring new battles, new documentation, new chances to move the needle 1 inch closer to justice. The old notebook was full. The new one was just beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, The system that had protected Raymond Stanton for 26 years was starting to realize that removing one judge hadn't ended anything. It had only revealed how much more work remained to be done.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.